I watched all 34 episodes of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror because it is spooky season and because I love the Simpsons. And we're going to go through one by one, rating them on how funny they are and how scary they are on this handy chart, so you can stick around to see how your favorite episode does. Because this is Scroll Deep, the show where we do this apparently.
This is coming out after Halloween.
Being released at the scariest time, mid-November! I've got to think about Christmas shopping soon. Ooh. Treehouse of Horror 1, which actually appeared in Season 2 of The Simpsons. That's right, they only started doing it in Season 2, which means every Treehouse of Horror, the number is one less than the season. This is the only one where you actually see the Treehouse of Horror that's in the title. The kids are in Bart's treehouse telling spooky stories. You've got Bad Dream House, where they go to like a haunted house, basically. Hungry Are the Damned, where they get abducted by Kang and Kodos, the aliens. First time you see them. And then you've got The Raven, which is literally just the poem The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, acted out by The Simpsons. It's also James Earl Jones doing the narration as well, which is like weirdly prestige-y.
Quoth the Raven.
Eat my shorts. Bart, stop it!
Overall, I would say not a particularly funny episode. They were actually seemingly going for real horror with this one. It's also like really early Simpsons, so it's not as gaggy and jokey. But The Raven always kind of creeped me out as a kid because there are really no gags in it. It really is just that creepy poem. So I'm going to give it a pretty good scary rating and a pretty low funny rating. But hey, gotta start somewhere. Treehouse of Horror 2, you got the Monkey's Paw, where they get a monkey's paw where they can make wishes. You got the Bart Zone, where Bart has powers and basically controls the whole town and everyone's afraid of him. And then you have If I Only Had a Brain, which is where Mr. Burns gets Homer's brain and puts it in a robot. This one, it's still a bit scary. The one where Bart has the mind powers always freaked me out a bit. But there's definitely more gags, especially the Mr. Burns brain one. They also have a conceit at the beginning of the episode that they all eat too much candy and each of the stories is a dream each of them is having. So again, they're still trying to explain why this episode is happening. Later on, they just kind of are like, it's Treehouse of Horror. One or two gags that stay with me.
He's got a board with a nail in it.
But overall, I would say kind of scary, not that funny. Treehouse of Horror 3, things have immediately got very good. We've got Clown Without Pity, which is the haunted Krusty doll, which is of course the episode which has the haunted, the cursed froghurt.
The toppings contain potassium benzoate. That's bad.
You've got King Homer, which is basically a King Kong parody, which has maybe my favorite Simpsons joke of all time, where they're like, we're going to Ape Island. I wish we were going to Candy Apple Island.
Candy Apple Island? What do they got there?
Apes, but they're not so big.
Dial Z for Zombies, which is where there's a bunch of zombies, has another all-time great joke when Homer shoots Flanders, and they go, Dad, you killed zombie Flanders.
He was a zombie?
Which I think the writers have said is one of their all-time favorite jokes on the show. There's a bit where the doll is trying to get Homer and he goes,
Bart, the doll's trying to kill me and the toaster's been laughing at me.
oh, so is this whole video just going to be Benedict quoting Simpsons jokes? Yeah. Is there a problem with that? Sorry, did you think it was going to be something else? But Treehouse of Horror 3, it's got it all. I'm going to give it a super high funny rating. But I'll be honest, a kind of low-ish scary rating. The doll one is kind of scary. The Krusty doll's got kind of sharp teeth. But apart from that, it's not that scary. Treehouse of Horror 4, now we're really in the swing of things. The Devil and Homer Simpson, that's where Homer sells his soul for a donut. Turns out Flanders is the devil. You like donuts, do you?
Have all the donuts in the world!
Hop, hop, hop. Terror at 5.5 Feet, which I remember as a kid finding really scary. It's where Bart's on the school bus and there's a little gremlin on the side and he's trying to kill him. Genuinely quite scary. And then Bart Simpson's Dracula, which is where Mr. Burns is a vampire. That's a really funny one. The bit where Homer's like, die, fiend! And he's like driving a stake into Mr. Burns. He's like,
Dad, that's his crotch.
possibly a GOAT contender, but also scarier than 3. So I'd give it quite a high scary rating, quite a high funny rating. So 4 is doing very well for us.
Oh, isn't that cute? He's trying to claw my eyes out.
Treehouse of Horror 5. First up, you got The Shinning.
You mean shining.
Shh, you wanna get sued?
You got Time and Punishment, which is where Homer, Dad, your hand is jammed in the toaster! Homer starts traveling through time. That's a funny one. And you also have Nightmare Cafeteria, which is where the teachers at the school start eating the kids, which always used to really freak me out. It's got some funny jokes, but it's actually really gnarly and gross. And just seeing them eat the kids is grim. And it ends with Bart and Lisa falling into a giant blender. It's also, I think, the first Treehouse of Horror that has like a fun running joke where Willie keeps getting stabbed in the back with an axe. Overall, really good episode. Last one is genuinely quite scary. So overall, I'm giving it super high, possibly even top marks for funny. I'm giving it super high for scary.
Scaredy cat.
Treehouse of Horror 6. First up, we have Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores. This is basically where all the billboards come to life. Kind of a forgettable one, but it does have the little song where they're like, just don't look, just don't look. But apart from that, not as memorable. Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, which is a Nightmare on Elm Street parody, which used to really freak me out as a kid, where Willie is trying to kill him. He can also transform, and that was really scary. There's a bit where Willie is like a giant pair of bagpipes. It used to really freak me out. And then you got Homer Cubed, which is famously the one where Homer becomes 3D animated.
I remember that blowing my mind as a kid.
Yeah, it was the first time we ever saw The Simpsons in 3D. The actual segment is not that interesting or impressive apart from the gimmick of him being 3D. And there's also like this weird ending where 3D Homer is then transported into the real world, like our world, and he's walking down the street. And I always used to find that really sad as a kid. I was like, wow, Homer's lost in a world that isn't his own. For some reason, it was very melancholy for me as a kid. I was like, that's really sad. He's trapped there. Overall, actually not my favorite episode. I would give it quite a high scary rating, kind of lowish marks for funny. Treehouse of Horror 7. You got The Thing and I. That's a classic one where Bart's got an evil twin called Hugo.
I'm afraid we haven't been entirely honest with you, Bart. You see, you have a brother.
So I have two brothers?
Lisa, please. Yes, Bart, you have a twin brother.
Then you got the Genesis tub where Lisa accidentally creates life in a little tub. And then you got Citizen Kang, which is a very specific parody of the 1996 US election because the Treehouse of Horror happened to come out around the same time as the election, so they were able to do like a weirdly well-timed parody. But you watch it now and it's just kind of incomprehensible because they keep talking about Bob Dole and stuff, and it's just like, what? It's also interesting because now when The Simpsons does political jokes, you get all these people who are like, why is The Simpsons being political? It didn't used to be. And it's like, they literally did a whole episode that was a parody of the 1996 election. They've always been very political. Overall, the one with Hugo, Bart's twin, that's really funny. The rest of it, not that funny, and none of it's very scary. So middling for me. Treehouse of Horror 8. You got the Omega Man, which is where France nukes Springfield. I never really remember this one. I feel like it was never on TV. I don't know if it got censored for some reason or whatever. There is one really funny joke though, which is where Homer's running away from some mutants and he jumps in a hearse and then he turns around and goes, "Ah! A coffin!" And that's the first thing all episode that scared him, which is quite funny. You got Fly vs. Fly, which is a parody of the film The Fly, where Bart gets merged with a fly. A little bit scary, not that funny, but kind of gross. And then you have Easy Bake Coven, which is where Marge is a witch, which is pretty short, but has an amazing line, which is at the end. The sea captain is being like a storyteller, and he goes,
"And it wasn't long before this yearly custom became an annual tradition."
Which I think is such a good classic Simpsons line. I love that. Overall, yeah, quite funny episode, quite scary episode. I guess it does reasonably well. Treehouse of Horror 9, you got Hell to Pay, which is where Homer gets Snake's hair. Snake is executed and Homer puts Snake's hair on and then Snake starts taking over Homer's brain. Quite a fun segment. You got the Terror of Tiny Toon, which is where Bart and Lisa get transported like into Itchy and Scratchy. Quite a fun original idea. I'm surprised they didn't do that before. And quite scary because it's quite violent. And then you got Starship Poopers where it turns out Maggie is actually an alien. And there's a bit where Homer goes, "Look, Maggie lost her baby legs." And I just find that really gross as a kid and I didn't really like it. Kind of an average episode, kind of scary, quite funny. Kind of, you know, kind of mid. And much like the show itself, we're starting to get into those later seasons where things aren't quite as shiny as they used to be, but it's still all right.
Oh, God! And out loud, this soup is out of control!
Treehouse of Horror 10. This is 10. This is a big one. This should be good, right? The first segment is I Know What You Diddly Idly Did. I would say this is possibly the most forgettable Treehouse of Horror segment ever, at least in the kind of classic era. This is where they accidentally run over Ned Flanders and then he turns out to be a werewolf. I've seen this show a billion times. I could not remember this when I rewatched it. I was like, wow, this is like the most unmemorable segment ever, which is crazy because the next segment, Desperately Seeking Xena, where Xena Warrior Princess turns up, is like one of the most memorable. I don't know if that just overshadows the previous one.
Let's get you kids home.
Wait a minute, Xena can't fly.
I told you, I'm not Xena. I'm Lucy Lawless.
And then you've got Life's a Glitch, and then You Die, where the world is going to be destroyed, and then they have to get on a spaceship to escape. It's just filled with loads of really specific American celebrities that I didn't know as a kid, don't really know now. There's a bit where Homer's like, oh my God, Rosie O'Donnell! And as a kid in England, I was like, who is Rosie O'Donnell? What does any of this mean?
Clang, clang, clang with the
Clang, clang, clang with the trolley.
Don't worry, Dad. We'll be dead in 5 minutes.
Not fast enough.
To this day, I'm like, I don't really know what this is.
Yeah.
The Xena installment is really good, so that pushes everything else up. So I'd give it a pretty good funny rating and probably like a 0 scary rating. There's nothing scary in this. Season 11, you got Ghost Dad. Homer dies, he chokes on some broccoli. This one's quite funny because he reads his horoscope and it's like,
Taurus, today you will die.
What?
And you may get a compliment from an attractive coworker. Lenny?
and then Marge checks hers and it's like, your husband will die. You got Scary Tales Can Come True, which is like a Hansel and Gretel one. I always remember it because at the end they throw the witch into her furnace and she just screams in agony and she's like, I'm in horrible pain. And as a kid I was like, Jesus. And then you got Night of the Dolphin, which is where dolphins rise up from the sea and take over Springfield. Again, kind of violent, although it has the classic Lenny line, alcohol and night swimming.
It's a winning combination.
And there's a bit where the dolphin gets up to speak and he goes, Snorky, talk, man. And then he clears his throat. Sorry about that. And he's just got like a normal voice.
Eons ago, dolphins lived on the land.
I'd give this one a pretty high funny rating. Actually a pretty high scary rating. I guess this one comes out pretty well. Treehouse of Horror 12. We've got Hex in the City. Good title, pretty lame segment where Homer gets cursed by a fortune teller. Pretty forgettable. Got a weird ending. Not a big fan. But then you got House of Wax, which is where they get an ultra house, which is a sort of 2001 A Space Odyssey parody where they've got a house that starts to control them. And the house is voiced by Pierce Brosnan, James Bond. And there's loads of James Bond jokes. They mentioned Jaws Lazenby. So obviously I'm in heaven because I love James Bond as much as The Simpsons. And then you have Whiz Kids, which is basically a Harry Potter parody. And I always remember it because they make a vomiting frog, which is really horrible. I remember as a kid hating that vomiting frog. And also Smithers is a snake called Slithers, which is like, it's a good pun. That's a good pun. Overall, I would give this good comedy, medium scary. It's not that scary.
Every moment I live is agony.
13. First up, got Send in the Clones, where Homer just makes loads of clones of himself. Fine. Not that exciting. Then we got The Fright to Creep and Scare Harms, which is another really weird, forgettable one where basically they decide to get rid of all their guns and then dead bodies come back from the grave and the dead bodies have guns. So then they take over the town and then they decide they need guns again. It's sort of a parody of gun control, but it's just a weird episode. Although there's one really funny bit where Kaiser Wilhelm comes back and he's the only like dead person who isn't a cowboy. And they go, this guy isn't a cowboy. And he goes,
Sure I am. Yippee whippy whippy.
Okay, he's in.
and him saying yippee whippy is very funny to me. But aside from that, kind of forgettable. And then you got the island of Dr. Hibbert where they go to Dr. Hibbert's island and everyone is like half animal. And this one used to really freak me out as a kid, the kind of body horror. And there's a bit where Flanders is half cow and he begs Homer to milk him and then he's milking cow Flanders and it's just, I mean, it's just upsetting, which I guess it's a horror episode, but I really hate it. I hate watching it and I don't like it.
Ooh, that's nice.
So I'd give it a pretty low score for humor, and I'd give it a reasonably high score for scares, or at least creepiness. So you got Reaper Madness, where Homer becomes the Grim Reaper. Frankenstein, where Professor Frink brings back his dad, and his dad starts like trying to claim body parts from people to sort of Frankenstein himself back into a person, kind of meh. But then you got Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, which is where Bart and Milhouse have a watch that can stop time, and I used to really love that as a kid.
My slacks, they've descended.
There's a bit where they break the watch and then they find a thing that's like the 8-hour guide to watch repair. And they're like, brilliant. And then it's like 15 years later. I think that one pulls the whole thing up. But overall, I would give it medium on funny and like 0 on scary. It's not scary. We're up to 15, about halfway. The Ned zone. Ned is able to predict people's deaths. Kind of funny. There's a bit where Homer goes, everything's coming up Homer, which is really weird because that's like a reference to everything's coming up Millhouse.
Everything's coming up Millhouse.
It's like a reference to the show within the show, which I guess you can get away with in Treehouse of Horror because it's like non-canon, but kind of funny to hear that. You got 4 beheadings and a funeral, which is kind of like a Jack the Ripper parody, which again, fine. This is season 15. Things are fine.
Come on. Give us a snog. Oh, that's not a snog!
And then you got In the Belly of the Boss, where there's like a really convoluted reason they need to go into a tiny spaceship and go through Mr. Burns' body.
I got her! Oh, man. No, wait. This is yours.
Again, fine. It kind of feels like at this point they're really not trying to be scary anymore, and it's season 15, so it's like kind of funny. But overall, I'd give this one probably the lowest marks of the ones we've done so far. Treehouse of Horror 16, we are firmly within the new era of The Simpsons here. Although there's kind of 3 eras, there's like classic Simpsons, there's like new Simpsons, and then there's new shiny Simpsons where they all have like proper 3D animated shadows and they have like a flat screen TV and it's like new. That stuff's usually pretty good. We're still in the middle section, sort of around the movie where things aren't as good. That being said, Treehouse of Horror 16, not bad. You've got BI, artificial intelligence, they get a robot Bart, it's fine. You've got Survival of the Fattest, which is where Mr. Burns hunts them for sport. Pretty meh. And then you've got I've grown a costume on your face, which is a pretty good pun on I've grown accustomed to your face. People get turned into their Halloween costumes. That one was pretty funny, some pretty solid jokes. Mayor Quimby is turned into Mayor McCheese, and there's a bit where he's being attacked by a dog and he says, I am not a happy meal right now. And I thought that was pretty good. So overall, relatively strong, especially for a new one. Strong jokes, not scary at all though. And spoiler alert, this is going to become a theme with all the new ones. They just don't really do the horror part anymore. They just do random stories. Treehouse of Horror 17, you got Married to the Blob. Homer becomes a big blob, absorbing everything. Pretty meh, but there is a giant Lenny, and anything Lenny is always great.
And to make matters worse, we're also being attacked by a 50-foot Lenny. Everyone's paying attention to Homer.
I still like you.
Thanks, Invisible Carl.
You gotta know when to golem. This is when they have a golem, which is like a thing from Jewish folklore, which is like a giant that does what you tell it to do. There's quite a funny bit where you see the origins of the golem and it's like gunning people down, and Krusty's like, and now he works for me. And Krusty does really badly in a comedy club, and then the golem just guns everyone down. And then you got The Day the Earth Looks Stupid, which is this sort of alien invasion thing, which ends with this like weirdly serious critique of the Iraq War, because that was sort of at the time kind of a sad ending to the episode, kind of dates it. Overall, I really like the episode though. Strong jokes, not scary, no fear anymore, but what are you gonna do? Treehouse of Horror 18, you got E.T. Go Home. This is like an E.T. thing, but with Kangen Kodos. There's one bit where Bart's going through his toys and he pulls out Funzo and Linguo, which is like a nice little throwback. There's one really funny joke where Homer's behind a door and he's trying to get rid of some people and he's doing like a Southern Belle voice. And he's like, hello there, to try and distract them. And he goes,
oh, I'm not decent. Let me throw something on.
And then he opens the door and he's dressed like Abraham Lincoln, but then he just keeps doing the voice.
Can I help you, gentlemen?
We know it's you, Mr. Simpson.
And then there's a bit where later on where he goes,
the South shall rise again!
And it's all so silly that I actually quite enjoyed that. Then you got Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, which is just a Mr. and Mrs. Smith parody. There's one joke I really like where Mr. Burns talks about a gully where he dumps electricity to raise the prices, and there's a photo of him just dumping like lightning bolts into a gully. Also, the excuse Homer gives of to why he's going out at night, because actually he's an assassin, but he says he's going to Midnight Monkey Madness at the zoo. And like, Midnight Monkey Madness is one of those phrases that has now lodged in my brain that I absolutely love. I'm laughing just thinking about it. So, and then you got Heck House, which I can barely even remember, pretty meh. Overall, I will say, I've noticed the animation is getting kind of less precise in these ones. It's looking a little more drawn in a kind of slightly slapdash way. Overall though, I would say very funny episode, not very scary. Treehouse of Horror 19. This opens with Homer trying to vote for Obama, so that kind of tells you where we're at. There's one joke where he's trying to use the voting machine and it's like fighting back. And he says, "This doesn't happen in America, maybe in Ohio, but not in America." And that's quite funny because it predates the Ohio meme by about 20 years. But I guess Ohio's always been a meme. Then you got Untitled Robot Parody, which I think is just a Transformers thing, which is meh. And then you got How to Get Ahead in Deadvertising, which starts with a Mad Men parody, which I quite like, but then also pretty meh. Basically, Homer has to kill celebrities so that they can use their likeness after death. There's a little bit of gore involved. That's the thing, these newest Treehouse of Horrors, they have like a bit of gore, but there's no horror. Case in point, the last segment of this is called It's the Grand Pumpkin Millhouse, and it's just a parody of Charlie Brown. I mean, there's an evil pumpkin in it, but it's just, none of it's Halloween anymore. Two of these segments are explicitly about Christmas. Basically, they're just episodes where the Simpsons are allowed to murder. That's the only difference between the regular episodes. There's no horror at all. Treehouse of Horror 20, XX, a big one, so hopefully it's good. You got Dial M for murder or press hash to return to main menu, funny name. Parody of Dial M for murder, the Hitchcock thing, kind of just a beat for beat recreation, not great. Don't have a cow mankind, pretty meh, but apparently Helen Lovejoy is Lisa's godmother, which is an interesting detail. And there's also one quite funny bit where they're looking for a safe zone from the like zombies or whatever it is they're running from. And there's a crazy guy and he goes, "Safe zone? You really think there is a safe zone?" Well, there is, it's over there. And then there actually is. It's quite a funny joke. There's no business like Mo Business. This one's odd. It's like a musical, like on a stage about Mo killing Homer and then stealing Marge from Homer. There's some good Mo stuff in there and there's some good musical jokes, like jokes about musicals. No horror whatsoever, like not scary at all. Like it's just a musical, but pretty funny. So relatively high on the funny scale, probably like 0 on the scary scale. All right, Treehouse of Horror 21. Treehouse of Horror can finally drink in the States. You got War and Pieces, which is board games come to life. Quite a creative segment, quite fun. There's also a bit where they just hold up lots of board games and they're all parodies of real board games. Like one of them's called Ravenous Rhinos. It's a simple joke, but made me laugh. Quite enjoyed that, quite funny. You got Master and Cadaver, which is a slightly convoluted like murder boat thing, but it's got Hugh Laurie in it and he's pretty funny. There's also a bit in it when someone is poisoned by food and so Homer goes,
"They should call this one Recipe for Murder."
What do you mean this one?
Never mind.
Which I don't love when they break the fourth wall in The Simpsons, but I thought that was pretty good. Then you got Tweenlight, which is a Twilight parody where they get Daniel Radcliffe to play Edward, which is a pretty inspired bit of casting. Again, there's a joke where Lisa goes, "My eyes are just dots with circles."
You have beautiful eyes.
They're just dots and circles.
To me, that's too on the nose of breaking the fourth wall and saying they're cartoons. I don't like it. And there's also a line from Homer where he goes,
"Pretty ironic. A cross being used to kill someone."
So overall, a really funny episode. A little bit scary, but at least they're trying to keep it Halloween. At least there's like a vampire in it. So overall, 21 impresses me. You know what doesn't impress me? 22. This one sucks so bad. You got the diving bell and the butterball. I think it is comfortably the worst Treehouse of Horror segment. Possibly one of the worst things The Simpsons has ever done. Homer gets paralyzed by a spider. He can then only communicate by farting. So just loads of fart noises, which actually, despite, you know, the occasional burp or whatever, is not really the humor of The Simpsons. They don't tend to just do extended fart sequences. He then like becomes Spider-Man, but he's like paralyzed farting Spider-Man. It's so bad. It probably sounds funnier me describing it, but it really sucks. And I actually looked up the reviews online and Vulture ranked this as the worst Treehouse of Horror segment of all time. So I'm not the only one. Then you got Dial D for Diddley, which is where Ned Flanders is Dexter. Meh. Then you've got In the Navi, which is a really boring parody of Avatar, which I think this episode came out like years after Avatar. They're just parodying anything they can think of. Like, what's Avatar got to do with Halloween? Overall, I would say worst Treehouse of Horror we've seen so far. Then Treehouse of Horror 23, The Greatest Story Ever Hold. There's like a little black hole that appears and sucks everything in. The animation on that is actually really cool. It's not super funny or scary, but good animation, I guess. Then you got Unnormal Activity, which is a Paranormal Activity parody. Actually, kind of scary because they basically just do paranormal activity, so that's inherently a little bit scary. Then you got Bart and Homer's Excellent Adventure, which is like a time travel thing which has nothing to do with horror or Halloween, but does weirdly have an excellent James Bond reference sequence where Bart travels back in time by passing all the James Bond posters of the movies that came out over the years. And so by that definition, because I love James Bond, it's the best episode I've ever seen. Kind of scary, definitely stronger than the last, but anything is stronger than the last one. So we're back into a pretty good place. Treehouse of Horror 24, you got an opening from Guillermo del Toro, which is pretty good. You got All the Places You'll Do, which is just a Cat in the Hat parody, which is funny and okay, but again, like not very Halloween. You got Dead and Shoulders, which is Bart's head on Lisa's body, which I quite like. That feels like kind of a classic Treehouse of Horror plot. It's fine, bit spooky. And then you got Freaks No Geeks, which is like a circus freak show one. And I'll be honest, at this point, I was really drifting off because, again, it's 11 hours worth of Treehouse of Horror that I watched for this project. I like The Simpsons, but they really do just start to kind of merge together after a while, marge together after a while, if you will. Treehouse of Horror 25. This is a pretty big one. 25. You got School is Hell. I made no notes about this one, so it obviously made no impression on me whatsoever. I assume it was boring. A Clockwork Yellow, which is just a parody of A Clockwork Orange, but actually pretty well done, and they slide some other Stanley Kubrick references in there. Pretty good, a little bit spooky. And then you've got The Others, which is basically the original drawings of The Simpsons from like the Tracy Ullman show, like pre-season 1. They reappear and sort of haunt The Simpsons in a parody of that film, The Others.
Well, hello. A ghost!
I really enjoyed that because I'm a huge Simpsons nerd, but if you didn't recognize those characters, you'd just be like, oh, there's some weird Simpsons here now, I don't get this. So it's a little bit inside baseball, but kind of liked it. So overall, medium scary, medium to low humor. Treehouse of Horror 26. We have so many more to go. Wanted, Dead Than Alive. Sideshow Bob turns up in Treehouse of Horror, I think for the first time ever, which is crazy. That seems like an obvious idea. And he finally gets to kill Bart, and he kills Bart over and over and over again. He keeps bringing him back to life and killing him. It's a good Simpsons-y idea. It's actually kind of gory. I'm into that.
24 years of trying to kill a 10-year-old child have finally paid off.
You got Homerzilla, which features them all doing Japanese accents.
The cherry blossoms, they're so beautiful. He is foolish. Stop foolish.
Come on, guys. I don't know about this, but also pretty boring. Because the problem is when they just do a straight recreation of the thing, you have to put a spin on it. You can't just do Godzilla. Then you've got Telepaths of Glory, which is a parody of the film Chronicle, which is not a super well-known film. I like the film Chronicle, but that's not The Shining. Do you know what I mean? But they also use the phrase
Everything's coming up Millhouse.
And that's a thing I'm noticing happening more and more. I don't know if they do this in the regular show, but they're starting to do self-referential callbacks in these Treehouses of Horror, which is kind of interesting. It's always funny to hear Everything's Coming Up Millhouse, but it's weird to hear it referencing itself.
Just because it looks like season 4 doesn't make it season 4.
27. So this is the 600th episode of The Simpsons overall. It opens with a Trump reference, which is very weird for me. Very, very weird. 600 episodes, the most episodes. I can't do Trump. I can do Trump. Let me be clear. All right, 600th episode, hopefully it's good. First up, you got Dry Hard, which is a Hunger Games parody, but they're doing it where there's no water. It's pretty good. You got BFF RIP, basically Lisa's imaginary friend is killing people around town. I like that, it's kind of horror. And then you got Mofinger, which is just kind of a straight James Bond parody, which obviously I love, but you know, again, not very scary. Not very scary, medium funny. Treehouse of Horror 28. The Exorcist, which is a parody of The Exorcist, flat meh from me. You got Coralisa, which is a parody of Coraline, which Neil Gaiman appears in, and the animation is very cool, but it's like computer, but it looks sick. This is a new pattern in these newer ones, is like really cool animation, even if the scripts aren't quite as good. Then you've got Homer, which is where Homer becomes a cannibal and starts eating himself. So he like chops off his finger and it accidentally falls in the barbecue and he eats it, and it's like genuinely very gross, and I kind of hate it. And in that way, I actually think it's good horror, and I'm kind of impressed. So this one gets a pretty good horror rating just because the Homer cannibal stuff, I don't know about you, but maybe I'm crazy, but I find cannibal stuff a bit gross. So yeah, pretty average on humor, but like kind of good on horror. Treehouse of Horror 29, Invasion of the Poddy Switchers. This is like Apple, which they call Mapple. Apple turn out to be like tree aliens and they steal everyone. It's a very convoluted plot. The plot of like tree or plant creatures is something that keeps coming up in these and will keep coming up. I don't know why they're so obsessed with that in The Simpsons. It's fine. Also, a lot of these segments I find just kind of end. They're just like, well, the allotted time has ended. We'll just kind of end and there's no conclusion, which is a bit meh.
Goodbye, sister. The last sound you hear will be...
You got multiplicity, which is Lisa doing like a split personality thing where she's lots of different personalities. Kind of just Lisa yelling a lot in different accents, kind of annoying. Then you got Geriatric Park, which is they're just doing Jurassic Park. It's not interesting to me to see animated dinosaurs doing the same thing as the dinosaurs in the movie. You have to do something with it, you know? So overall, it's fine, meh. Then you got Treehouse of Horror 30. Now this is the 30th episode of Treehouse of Horror, and it's also the 666th episode of The Simpsons overall, which is very cool. I like that they made that line up. 666, I got high hopes for this. First up, you got Danger Things, which is a parody of Stranger Things. You can tell they're in this mode now where every year they just go, what is a recent thing we can just parody? There's not like, you know, they're not looking spooky. But obviously Stranger Things, prime real estate for a parody.
Well, there is one thing that's better. At least there's no stupid
howdly doodly, neighborito.
And there's quite a good joke where Homer puts up a poster for Finding Nemo on the wall. It says Nemo, and then he looks in the mirror and it reverses it and it says Omen, which is like a good parody on like the red rum murder thing from The Shining. I was like, that's a pretty good joke. Heaven Swipes Right. This is quite fun. Homer dies and gets to come back to Earth in other people's bodies, and so they do some like body swap stuff. Again, kind of Treehouse of Horror-y. I'm kind of into it. And then you got When Harry Met Slimy, which is Selma falls in love with Kang, one of the aliens, which just kind of feels like they're doing Treehouse of Horror generator.com. I mean, they're just like, this character and this character, me. I was really like, my eyes were like sliding off the screen on this one. I was just like, they're going through the motions. So kind of a lame ending. Kind of funny, not that scary. Then you got Treehouse of Horror 31. This is a parody of the... Yes, I'm getting tired. Opens with a parody of the 2020 election. As someone who doesn't like keep up with The Simpsons week to week these days, very jarring for me. They're all wearing masks and talking on smartphones, and it's just like, oh, it's weird because I just really associate The Simpsons with the 90s because that's who I am. But seeing them all in masks is just like, it's too recent for me. Toy Gory, a parody of Toy Story, the obvious Halloween thing. It's like 3D animated. I guess it's meant to look like Toy Story, but I actually think it really looks like The Simpsons Hit and Run. So I enjoyed that. There's also a bit where Bart has a Geiger counter in his room. He gets a radioactive man and it says, with real radiation, and he puts it next to a Geiger counter, and I just like that he has that. Pretty funny and also kind of scary because the toys get revenge and turn Bart into a toy, and he's like motionless and they keep like punishing him, and it's kind of gross. Then you got Into the Homerverse. See what I was saying about just parodying recent things? Which I guess is a parody of Into the Spider-Verse, but they just make lots of different Homers. Really kind of funny, not that great. But the Vomiting Prince from the Harry Potter parody from like 20 years ago at this point turns up again, and I'm like, that's kind of funny. You got B9 Rewind, which is a parody of Russian Doll, the kind of Groundhog Day show where they keep reliving the same day. Pretty boring, nothing much happens. Lisa dies over and over again. I guess there's a bit of gore. I've apparently written relatively good, quite funny, a bit scary, decent ep. So apparently I enjoyed this a lot more at the time than I remember it. So apparently it was actually good. Treehouse of Horror 32 opens with Bong Joon-ho's This Side of Parasite, which is just Parasite. So if you enjoyed the award-winning film Parasite, this is that, but if The Simpsons was in it, which is fine. Nightmare on Elm Tree, which is like the actual tree that holds the treehouse from Treehouse of Horror, like comes to life. Again, they love their like plants coming to life and killing people. Then you've got like a bit where they do a poem, which kind of reminds me a bit of the Raven segment from the early days, which is kind of fun. And then they do a parody of The Ring, which is kind of wild that it took them this long to do a parody of The Ring. That seems like an obvious thing to parody. They did a parody of Toy Story before they did a parody of The Ring, one of the most famous horror movies of all time.
We watched a cool TikTok, but anyone who watches the TikTok dies after 7 days. Have you heard about this deadly TikTok?
But I guess, was it Scary Movie or whatever that kind of did The Ring to death? Overall, you know, it's a parody of The Ring. Now, there is actually another episode after this, 33, but that's not currently available on Disney Plus in the UK. So unfortunately, poor me, I didn't have to watch that one. And then by the time you see this, 34, whatever it is, may have come out in the States because it's coming out this November. But again, I can't access that in the UK. So if you'll forgive me a mere 11 hours of footage, and I missed these last two.
I watched all 34 episodes.
He lied to us through song. I hate when people do that.
But overall, what conclusions can we draw? Well, this may shock you, but I'd argue The Simpsons has decreased in quality somewhat since the 90s. There's still some good stuff in there. I see articles these days that are like, The Simpsons is good again now, and there definitely is like an upswing again. The new episodes do have some solid jokes, but the level of quality is still a bit meh. They also also rely quite a lot on musical numbers in these latest ones, but the musical numbers aren't very funny, and it kind of feels like a way to just kill time. Some of these newer ones are probably worth checking out. There's some in there that are pretty good, but of course none of them are ever going to replace the classic like Treehouse of Horror 3 or whatever, mainly because that's got the sheen of nostalgia around it. What was my favorite episode? Overall, I mean, the ones that stand out to me, when Homer sells his soul for the donut, that's a classic one. Actually, Treehouse of Horror 5, that's a pretty amazing episode. I do think, of course, frozen yogurt, which I call froghurt, probably my favorite little section of any episode of Treehouse of Horror. And it taught me what potassium benzoate was as a kid. I don't know what it is, but I know it's bad. Honestly, in terms of scariest, like the really, really early ones, like Treehouse of Horror like 1 and 2, where they would actually, I think, just trying to be scary. Like the Raven, where they just do the Raven, always kind of freak me out. Those ones really unsettle me, because they're not really trying to be funny, they're trying to scare you. And the much newer one where Homer becomes a self-cannibal, it was very upsetting, and I applaud them for that. The paralyzed Spider-Man fart story is dead last, just like the absolute worst. There's some of these stories where I was like bored watching them, or like kind of disinterested. That one I was like actively insulted. I was like, how dare you make me spend my time watching this? I wonder if you can pinpoint the exact moment his heart breaks in half. No, I wonder if you can pinpoint the exact moment where it gets not as good. I think it would be 12, and then after that, it's never quite as good, which must have been season 13. You know, hey, that means 12 good episodes out of 32. No, that means 12 banger episodes out of 32, and then there's some, you know, decent ones after it. It's still a genuinely good show at times. But I guess the ultimate conclusion that we can all come to is that this project was so much work, and let's never do something like this again. No. If you've enjoyed this, let us know. We definitely want to do more like TV film stuff. Maybe next time we'll watch something even more extensive. I'll watch every episode of Grey's Anatomy. If you've made it all the way through the whole of this project, please comment Treehouse Strong in the comments, and I'll see you back in our regularly scheduled programming. I'll see you back in our regular.